Hello, I'm Paul,
And I'm Wendy.
and we're here to introduce you to mind scams. These are the devious tricks our mind plays to get instant gratification, ensuring that we ignore what helps us achieve our outcome. They're often behind why we eat the wrong foods, we drink too much, don't get enough sleep or exercise. They're best friends with procrastination. So Wendy and I had set out to make a video about mind scams, and to make it real, we thought about conversations we'd had in our real lives.
Of course, surely there wouldn't be any mind scams in our real conversations. After all, Paul has coached teams in Agile for over 20 years, transforming programs worth hundreds of millions of euros.
And Wendy's been a coach, psychotherapist and NLP trainer for 2 decades, and she co-authored the book Clean Language. Surely these highly experienced people with years of personal development wouldn't be susceptible to mind scams. Well, maybe there might be just a few mind scams in our conversations, but not many. No.
However, when we tried to make this video, we spent a whole day doing everything except making it. So what on earth meant that 2 people with years of NLP and clean language coaching experience utterly failed to reach their own outcome? Let's find out.
So in the rest of the video, you'll see some examples that were taken from our actual conversation on that day when we failed to make the video. We'll describe what we said, and then we're going to debrief our shame and our horror publicly in front of you. So see if you can spot the mind scam as we describe each example. And we'll also debrief some of the repeating patterns that we're running.
So if you understand mind scams and, more importantly, the patterns and motivations of these behaviors, you can make a huge difference to yourself and your clients, particularly any time it's not immediately obvious why resourceful people seem unable to achieve their outcome. So we'll show you some of that in this video and dive much deeper in our conference session.
Yeah, and just a quick note on the examples you're about to see. In the conference session itself, we'll be talking about mind scams happening for one person. So maybe you, maybe your client. In the examples in this video, you'll get to see not only how individuals mind scam themselves, but how 2 people can happily collude in collaborative mind scamming. So let's find out how they do it. So this example is from when Wendy and I first started talking. So we opened our call and I said, okay, we've got that video to do today, but Wendy, I haven't seen you in ages. You've been away in South Africa. You haven't had power. It sounds like a nightmare. Let's just do a quick catch up. What was happening?
So this was an example of a believable excuse, which gives you the excuse to do something other than the outcome. Cast iron excuse. Given how important doing the video was it necessary to do our catch-up right then? Not really. We could have done it later. But it seemed very believable at that moment that catching up was the thing to do first. I'd been away. We hadn't talked in about 6 weeks. And obviously everything I had to say was very interesting.
Now notice there's a subtle difference between a believable excuse and a true reason for doing something else. The mind scam is that we trick ourselves into believing that something else is more important, but we don't actually challenge that more important. So after we caught up on Wendy's exciting escapades in South Africa, it was my turn. So what I said was, oh, Wendy, that's so interesting. But I've got a whole list of things to tell you because we haven't seen each other for so long. And, well, we do need to get this video done. But I have to tell you this one little thing.
So this is an example of telling yourself untruths. It's another way in which you can do something other than going for your outcome. There are 2 untruths here. Did you spot them both? First of all, Paul said, I have to tell you. Did he actually have to? No. He could have waited and nothing particularly bad or good would have happened. And secondly, he said it was one little thing. So how little do you think it actually was? 30 minutes later, and followed by a second thing, we moved on to other topics.
Now, notice that Wendy in no way called me on it. She didn't say, that's not a little thing, or this is the second thing. She was happily in collusion with me the whole way through. And also, at various points, I knew damn well it wasn't going to be little. And that all highlights an important aspect of mind scams, which is how they help you to avoid taking responsibility for your actions. So our third example comes from much later in the day. We had, to some extent, realised that we needed to do something around the video, and we'd had a bit of a discussion about keeping it simple. And as I talked about keeping things simple, and maybe if we showed how far we got, the idea of just making a completely blank video came up. At which point I told Wendy about the composer John Cage, who had written a piece of music that is just empty measures in the score. I couldn't remember what it was called. I thought, let's just do a quick search on Google. And there I found out it's called 433. I thought, this is really interesting because
somehow that led on to us talking about a viral optical illusion.
We turned to a conversation about my carpentry skills.
I got myself some tools to shorten my new watch strap.
So this is an example of what we call actively ignoring your outcome. We spent a good 30, 60 minutes not in any way talking about our outcome, but we really enjoyed ourselves. At various points in this mammoth detour, I think we each consciously knew we weren't making the video, and we carried on regardless.
And to take as an example, the story about the carpentry, I actively justified hearing the story about the carpentry because I've got a lock that needs adjusting, and I wanted to know how Paul did it.
Yeah, and my motivation, I think, is just like, I'm like a small child bringing my painting back from nursery, and I want Wendy to give me some approval and put it on her fridge.
Which I happily did. Of course, I expected the reverse when it came to my watch strap story.
And I happily have a watch strap on my fridge now. So this mind scam stops us taking any responsibility for a good hour and actually making the video. So we've seen several examples of mind scams in action, and I'm sure you can think of ideas for what we could do differently. But what's interesting is the mind scams that we repeatedly do. When you pay attention to patterns of behaviour when coaching, you can have a greater impact and help the client prioritise what changes to make. Mind scams are patterns that are common across many people. And there'll be other additional patterns, possibly more unique to the client, that make a difference as well.
So what were the patterns that we were running in our examples? Well, for one, we talk about a quick catch-up, I want to tell you one little thing, about a quick search on Google. We have a pattern of reducing the amount of time things take.
Yeah, and we're distracted by interesting. So the interesting news that Wendy had to tell, the interesting thing that I just had to tell her, the many, many, many interesting things, well, interesting to us, about John Cage and carpentry and watch straps.
These all hint at a deeper level of what's going on, a world of conflicting and hidden motivations. So in our session, we'll explore all of this in more depth. Mind scams you haven't seen here, what motivates them, and strategies for doing something about them, so that you can make more effective changes in yourself and with your clients.
Yes, and you'll be examining your own mind scams. And having just gone through that process ourselves, we can tell you how incredibly valuable that is. It's made an immediate difference to how effectively we work together. So we look forward to seeing you there. So you do know that if you talk to Wendy about that, you will not reach enlightenment.
Nor a video.
But it's so much fun to talk to Wendy! That's kind of what was going on in my head.
Yeah, right.